Today I'll overhear a lot of people saying things like, I'll never be able to afford a home. I'm just going to have to wait to start working on my goal of making more income until things are a little better out there in the world. I was saying those exact same things 7 years ago before I decided that I was going to take control and I was going to pivot into a high income space that I had no previous experience in whatsoever. And so today I'm going to share with you my story of how I entered into the tech space without any degrees that were related or really any formal experience, but there's a caveat to that. So let's go ahead and get started. So a huge reason that I am where I am today is because as a result of working multiple low-paying jobs for years, I became fed up and I simply decided that there was no plan B. I knew there was something better out there for me. And so while I was working part-time, I started to do things like side hustling, and I wanted to learn some skills that I knew would be taking me places hopefully one day, whether that was in my own business, which I started as a virtual assistant, or if I could flip those and build those into some experience to work in the corporate space. Before I get into exactly what I did, and this is related to a video that I have on my channel where I previously uploaded what I would do if I were to start from nothing. And so this is going to detail specifically the career aspect. If you haven't seen that video, that might be interesting for you to watch before this one. I wanted to give you a little bit of context about my life and sort of where I was coming from before I got started into this pivot. So some of the frustrations that I had that I remember so deeply when I was getting started with this was that it just seemed impossible for me. It seemed like none of the jobs that I was applying to where they were full-time with benefits, where I was even gonna get an interview. I was so frustrated with this, and the world just seemed like everything was so expensive, cost of living was just crazy, and that, I was just going to have these unmarketable skills, these useless college degrees that would get me nowhere. So my 2 college degrees, I have one in Spanish and one in marine biology. And originally I thought I would go to grad school, and I decided that it just wasn't something for me. A lot of people today are saying that things were better back then, okay, just that general phrase. But when I put myself in my shoes 7 years ago, I still felt often like I feel today, or I see other people feeling today, that there wasn't an opportunity for me. I was not going to beat out all of the competition to get a better job or even get better clients in my business, that I was going to be just working multiple jobs for forever, that I could never make above a certain amount, blah, 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 blah. Those were all what I call now my limiting beliefs, and I had to work through that. I did actually start a business right out of college. That failed, and we had to liquidate everything. I have been let go from a job that I loved after 2 years of being in the position, and I've had to move back home and start all over again. So I have been through those things that I think a lot of us would see as failures, but yet learned a lot and decided to get to a place where I was not going to let those beliefs hold me back any longer. If you want to be successful today, if you want to make this pivot and get into a higher income field, you have got to change your mindset. You have got to start believing that you are worth it, that you have something, that you have what it takes, and you've got to take action on that with that frame of mind. These are all excuses, and if you don't change your mindset, you will never even get to the point of getting the interview. Okay, you will just be giving up constantly. Your cycle will be going over and over and over again. So I want to encourage you and tell you that, trust me, if I can get myself to that point, someone who has dealt with a lot of anxiety in the past, you can too. Say this with me: there is no plan B. I'm fed up and things are going to change. I must also tell you that it's going to get super uncomfortable to make these changes, and it's going to feel very hard, but that is how you know that you are growing. And as long as you take those lessons and you learn from them and then act on what you've learned, I believe that you will get there. Now, I'm not gatekeeping anything here, and I do want you to realize that yes, times are different now. I think in the hiring space, in the tech space, it changes so fast, but you can still figure out how to make things work to your advantage. You just need to, I'm going to present this as also some principles that I think just in my frame of mind and my actions and the way that I analyzed getting into this space, the way that that could also help you in today's times, okay? So I wanted to say that, and I'm also going to give you some, like I said, context from my actual life. First of all, I kept a part-time job while I was working on this pivot, and I also side hustled. So it was almost like I had 3 jobs during this period of about 6 months or so. I had previously started a part-time job. I was also working as a virtual assistant. I was helping my husband with designing websites. I was helping with designing logos. I was also starting to dabble with social media management and digital marketing, Facebook ads, which is what I eventually ended up specializing in with my side hustle. And then the third thing that I felt like was also a full-time job was I was researching, studying, doing all I could to meet what I had learned were the requirements to get a job in a higher income space. So again, like I said, I was side hustling, and this was part of my strategy to build experiences that I could put on my resume that I knew were high earning. It was also part of my strategy to not keep all of my eggs in one basket should my plans to pivot into the tech field not work out. Okay, so very important. And I have to say, like, I was truly ruthless with cutting out things that were not contributing to my goal. So I focused a lot on working out. I was making sure that I was eating healthy-ish, for what I could afford at the time. But I really cut out a lot of unnecessary spending on things. And I have to say, if you drink or spend money on other things that are just not wise to be spending money or time on, you need to go ahead and cut that out if you're serious about this, okay? Literally, the way that I looked at it was my self-care, my moment of being, free was basically my workouts. And so everything else was devoted to this goal of getting the higher income earning job and career going. Also, I continued to side hustle even after I got the job. I have, through all 4 years of my career working for one company, I still maintained a side hustle that I worked nights and weekends and did a lot of extra things so that I could get even further ahead. Highly recommend that you do the same, especially if you are still in your 20s and you don't have children and you're not married. Okay, I also have to say this because now as a parent, I truly realize these constraints of having young children where you must find childcare outside of public school, for example. So when I started this pivot, I was basically newlywed and had no children. And so while, my husband was not making a very lavish earning, he was working for this startup, and we had decided that we really lived in an apartment we could barely afford, but he was able to walk across the street to get to work, so that saved us a lot on commute. We also drove paid for cars, so we did not have the extra expenses of a car payment to be making and worrying about every month. And so that really also freed up our finances to take more risks, like making pivots in our career. I recognize that there are now a lot of constraints if you have young children and you're trying to make a big career pivot like I did. We also don't have family that lives near us, and so I really feel for those of you who are single moms or parents that don't have family close by to help you out with childcare and you're working on leveling up your income together, right? It is difficult. Now, I mentioned my husband was working for a startup, and let me tell you, he was not making 6 figures at this point either. He had moved back here for us to get married and had heard about this company and decided to start interviewing with them because he did have a computer science degree and had some previous work with one other job before that he was working in nonprofits for a couple of years or so. But he decided to take on this position, and so we were not living a lavish newlywed life at all. I think sometimes I see people get the, oh, it's so hip and cool to work for a tech startup because you see all the people in San Francisco who are doing that and living that cool lifestyle, and they're probably getting paid quite decently for what they're doing out there. Whereas part of this company strategy that we realized was them being based here on the East Coast in a smaller town which therefore meant that they could pay smaller town East Coast wages for workers, okay? And they were able to kind of get a little scrappy with hiring people. So this is something I wanted to share because I did not have the extra, financial support of my husband. We were living paycheck to paycheck. There are some risks associated with working for a startup in the short term. I fully understand that, but there are ways, of course, you can analyze making that a wise decision. There are very great long-term benefits though if you are successful in this approach of working for a startup and starting a career there. A lot of times there are startups who will look for talent based on sort of a hodgepodge of their skills because they're trying to, of course, like I said, reduce their costs on their salaries that they're paying, but find other ways to retain the employees through maybe their benefits package or something like that, or just them being in a wonderful location to live. And that was exactly this situation that my husband found himself in after coming back to the city when we got married and learning about the opportunity there. I also have to mention that I did not come from money. However, I'm very grateful that my dad had always agreed to pay for my student loans if I were to finish college. And so I did complete my degrees. Like I said, I have 2 degrees that are, I don't want to say completely useless, but they did not contribute to my career very much. And I'm grateful that I did not have extra student loan payment. I also have no family connections into the tech space. I barely even had any friends that were connections. Basically, it was just my husband who was the connection that I then was able to meet other people through and start to learn more about the different opportunities that maybe I could make work for myself. So here's the steps that I took, and it's really been interesting to come back and look at these and break these down because I just find how when we are so determined to achieve something, our mind can get very creative and we seem to forget a lot of the things that hindered us once we have made a decision that there's no plan B. So first, of course, I became aware of the opportunity and opportunities that I could possibly make work for myself. It took me about 6 months overall from the time that I had made the decision to make working in the tech space my goal. And then I specifically knew I was going to work at the company that my husband was working for. Every time I would walk by that office building, I would just say that I'm going to work there one day. And I kept myself focused on that belief. I knew that they were hiring like crazy. It wasn't just my husband coming home and telling me things behind the scenes. In fact, there are a lot of confidential things that you're not supposed to share with your spouse when you work for these companies. But there was a lot of buzz around town. Okay, so I was aware of this opportunity and that I knew that it was early to get in on this. There was also still a lot of skepticism. A lot of people in my town, I don't think were really thinking with this idea of, okay, this company is going to be successful one day. But I sort of had an inkling that it would be, and I knew if it wasn't, I was at least going to get somewhere with it. So research that I did, and I would recommend you do. I researched job requirements like crazy. I would go and look at all of the job listings and I would see what did they all have in common that they were asking for. I would look for things that were parallel to my experience in the dozens of part-time jobs that I held, and even especially with the business and the side hustle that I was currently running. And so from there, that's really how I was able to start crafting a resume that I could present eventually to people who were going to be conducting interviews. I also made it my mission to spend time learning everything I could about the company, from how it was started to who was running it. I was also looking at who their customers were and how they were dealing with the customers. What did their products solve for the customers? I looked into all of those things and I made sure that I knew them. I also learned a lot about the who's who of the company and the culture there. How did people dress when they went to work every day? How did people generally present themselves? What were their personalities like? That was the type of thing that I learned through kind of saying yes to getting out there and getting around those people and not feeling like I was less than. I was making sure that, you know, I would still have the beginner's mind, but I was asking questions or just getting to know them, even getting to know them and what they like to do personally. One of the biggest things I discovered about the company was that they required Salesforce certifications for almost every single position. And so that became my number one priority that I identified, was to get my Salesforce certification done. And so it did take me from start to finish 6 months, somewhere around there, in order for me to study and to take the exam and pass it. I actually passed the exam successfully my first try, but I do want to say, because I know some of you might be interested in working for a company as a Salesforce administrator, that, you know, I can't answer specific questions about how to pass the exam today because it was so different back then, and they have changed the objectives and different sections so much since then. I still maintain my certification, but it's not the same as if I were to go and retake the administrator exam today. I do believe that they have made it more difficult, but I'm not saying it's not impossible, because I truly believe, like I said, if you set your mind to something and you really commit and dedicate yourself to it, granted that, you know, you understand you have some inkling for technology there, that it can be achieved one way or the other. So before I decided to go and just start applying to positions that I thought I would be interested in, I had 2 prerequisites for myself. That number one, I wanted to successfully complete the Salesforce Administrator Certification, and number 2, I wanted to make sure my resume was like on point to be passed around and to be presented to hiring managers. So with those 2 requirements being met, I ended up beginning to just pass my resume around to people that I had met and knew that worked there, mainly through my husband actually. And I think that, you know, I'm very, I don't want to say lucky, but it was something that I saw as an opportunity. A lot of people would, I think, say, well, my husband works there, that's not going to fly, or that's not going to be my way, my connection in. But this company, I was not the only significant other to be sort of like applying for jobs and looking for a way in at this time. And that may not fly at some other companies, but for this one, it was perfectly fine. And I think that, you know, if you have an opportunity, you have an opportunity. So take advantage of it. And so my resume, I started to give to different people. And one of the most prominent people that received my resume and that I started to meet with was the CIO at the time. And he would give me feedback. He would pass it around to people he knew were looking to add to their teams. After he looked it over and thought, okay, yeah, you might be good for this position they're looking for, or that position, are you interested in this? And he gave me feedback on how to improve my resume, move things around, reword things a little bit better. And I definitely made sure to follow up by delivering a handwritten thank you note to him for the time that I met with him. So ultimately, I ended up having 3 positions that I applied for. So you've got to take action. Once you've identified your minimum requirements, you've got to actually follow up on those things, and that's what I did. So I applied for this position, and I thought this was really one of the best entry-level opportunities for me. Went into the interview. I left the interview kind of thinking, okay, this did not really go quite like I thought it would. Surely enough, I did not get accepted for that role, which was pretty discouraging because I knew that this role was one of the ways that a lot of people that had little to no experience or were just entry level would get hired for a full-time position. What I did have was an understanding of the types of questions I needed to go back and study and review and how I needed to respond to them. And so that was helpful in and of itself. And I could have just gotten really down on myself. I'm not gonna lie, it did sting, but I decided to keep going. Another position came up shortly after that was in a different space that was more related to marketing, and I thought, okay, this seems like it could be the one. I could really see myself getting into marketing in the tech industry and building a career on that. That interview went a lot better. However, I still got turned down for the position. So I was pretty disappointed at that point, and I questioned, okay, is this really going to work out for me, or what do I need to do? How do I go back to the drawing board to improve myself? But I kept talking to people, and eventually the CIO came back and offered me a 3-month internship. And this was something that I accepted right away. It was in the IT department. And some of you may or may not know, maybe that's not everyone's first choice if they're looking for creating a big career in a tech company, but some people it is, and I think it's a great place. I loved the idea of getting to work on the inside and not necessarily directly with customers or product, but to support the mission of the company. And so I accepted, and my work had just begun really at that point, because when you get your foot in the door somewhere, it is now your mission to make sure that everyone who you encounter would not be able to see the company without you in it. And that was really how I approached work every day. I showed up to all of the meetings that I was invited to. I took on extra challenges that I was asked, even if it seemed like it might have been busy work. And I also showed up to any extracurriculars, but like team building activities that were kind of outside of work hours. I showed up to all of them so that I could build those relationships with the people that I was working with and hope to work with full time one day. At the end of the 3 months, I was offered a full-time role. I was ecstatic. I had done it. I had achieved my mission, and although it wasn't an overnight transformation or an overnight pivot, I knew that for me, this was just something amazing that I had accomplished. I mean, I came in with no computer science background. I'm working in the IT department. I had a little bit of a business background. I think what I really showed was my determination, my persistence, my ability, and almost my affinity for learning in a constantly changing environment. I actually found that I really thrive in more of a startup space, especially as I continued to work for this company for over 4 years, and they eventually grew into a public corporation. And so I learned a lot. You know, I'm really just so grateful that I took these opportunities and I thrived. You know, I took on the challenge and I thrived in that. So it could have ended differently for me. It could have been something that, you know, I did the internship, but what I would have done from there is just build off of that experience and go on to the next thing that I could get to. So in the IT department, I basically had been offered what was an entry-level position of business analyst, and this gave me, I think, the opportunity, and also the department opportunity, to have me participate and contribute across a variety of ways. So I was able to work on things like project management. I was also doing a little bit of help with, you know, some Salesforce projects, and also able to work on doing things like knowledge management and documenting a lot of things. And so I worked across a lot of the company, because IT supports everyone in the company basically from a technology standpoint. And so I learned a lot of different things, and it was really awesome for me. I learned that I just had, eventually I learned that I had an affinity for project management, because I was, like I've mentioned a little bit, or alluded to, ruthless with my time management. I was a problem solver. I would show up with, you know, there's a lot of stressful situations, and a lot of times you will encounter in a job people that maybe the personalities don't quite line up to yours. And I decided to be a team player. I decided to always come in with the, how can we solve this problem, versus let's just sit and complain about it and look at all of the negativity about it and how it's going to cost us or is going to be a pain to fix, or, you know, XYZ. That is something that I made sure to bring in, and I think really benefited me when it came to actually gathering and learning the real skills for project management. This really took me far, and even today, although I have since left the corporate space, I will now get people who give me feedback on, hey, you continue to show up even when things get hard, and that's why you have been successful. So moral of the story is, in wrapping this up, you have to be persistent, you have to be clear on what you want. You need to spend the time eliminating things that are not going to contribute to your goal of getting into a high income space. And you need to network. You've got to meet people. I think in the space since 2020, a lot of us are just using digital aspects to submit resumes, to, I think, just randomly message people. I would recommend, you know, working with a recruiter if that is something that is an opportunity you come across, because that could help you to get into, maybe you don't get that first internship, maybe you actually do get the entry-level position, because they can help you sort of take your experience and present it more so in a better way. So you've got to really take the time, I think, to also upgrade your skills and level up your skills. If you don't have a college degree, maybe that's where you start with just taking an online college associate's degree or something, which might take you more time, but you can work on some of these other things like getting the certifications and networking and all of that while you are doing the education part, okay? So I am hopeful that this encouraged some of you. I'm hopeful that it gives you some ideas to think about. Again, like I said, I think that there's always been difficulties for us when it comes to leveling up or pivoting and working towards making a higher income, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible. Doesn't mean that it's impossible to achieve your goal. And so, especially as we get ready to start a new year, there are going to be hiring budgets that are going to be renewing, and there are going to be new programs that are starting up where you can learn and increase your skills. Take advantage of that and make some big changes, even if you feel like you don't have the experience to match. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that it gave you some encouragement today towards your goal of earning a higher income in maybe the tech space, for example, where you have no experience. I really believe that this was something that was so important to my level up journey as a whole, and that while I'm not working in a corporate career right now, it really has contributed to giving me the opportunity and the choice to stay home and raise my babies. So that is something that, you know, for me, I find just, I'm so grateful for every day, and even though I miss it, you know, it's been a really big life changer. So I hope that you will find your life-changing opportunity soon. Please let me know if you have any questions in the comments down below. I would love to hear from you. And if you haven't seen any of these videos here on my channel, please take a little bit and catch up. Until next time, bye.